continue to join. Thank goodness we're not hearing the bing, bing, bing here today.
Progress.
We have started our recording, and we will have folks joining us as we go along. Again, this is the third in a series of discussions around virtualizing local government and what that means to different organizations across the country. Today, we're recognizing that in local government, resilience and virtualization, these things are measured on a continuum, right? There's no finish line. We're never done with this work. And this week, we're going to discuss how large organizations are not immune from the challenges that we've been talking about in some other organizations. We're going to talk about the city of San Jose and how San Jose has faced challenges for the last few years. There was a flood in 2017 that really pushed them to adopt some of these measures and what's that meant between now and then. And then we'll pivot to the state of Arizona and discuss how the state is shifting gears in response to the current crisis and what does this mean for the future. Joining me today are Rob Lloyd, the Chief Innovation Officer for the City of San Jose. I've had the pleasure of working with Rob on a task force responding to the COVID crisis, putting together a plural sector collaborative team to create a testing management platform, data analysis platform, and we're thrilled to announce that Tarrant County, Texas is our first adopter, covering over 1 million citizens there in Tarrant County. So it's been a real fun ride working with Rob the last month or so. Andrew Lombard is the Executive Vice President of Innovation and Venture Development at the Arizona Commerce Authority. Andy and I are just getting to know each other, but based on our organization's deep presence in Phoenix and the Valley, look forward to digging in with the ACA quite a bit more as we roll forward. Once again, we're joined by Dr. Peter Pernijad, the Senior Director of Public Sector Strategy at Oracle, and Tom Spangler, the Executive Chairman of PrimeGov, my kind of co-hosts and partners in crime for this webinar series.
Awesome to be here.
Our process today, as always, is a facilitated discussion. I'll begin by asking our panelists some specific questions. And in the meantime, I'll be monitoring the chat and where you can put up questions for any of our panelists, and I will go through and then use that to pick and choose and ask them to dig deeper into any particular subject. So Rob, I'm gonna start with you. Can you just kind of walk us through San Jose's journey from before the floods in 2017 through today's crisis, and specifically focusing on how this concept of virtual government, both in service delivery and in personnel management, how has that evolved for you in this time and in the context of these two crises?
Sure. So starting, I came to the organization about 4 years ago. And in February of 2017, we kind of had that moment in time where you get a gut check because you see how prepared have you really been. And San Jose is the 10th largest city in the country. Got about 1.1 million people, 185 square miles, about 85,000 businesses, of which 134-ish are global headquarters. So really an epicenter of a lot. It's the heart of Silicon Valley. But in 2017, we discovered that we weren't as prepared for disasters as we needed to be. And we said we have to be ready because of the earthquake, the next floods, the fires. And lower on the list at the time was pandemic, but that has since rotated more towards the top. And we said that it's not a matter of the operational pieces of keeping certain things in government working. It's actually a question of resilience. And resilience meaning, can your people handle that transition and that moment, the response and the recovery? Can your economy and your organization structure for that to be part of an exercise and you're ready because you've practiced it and you've exercised it. So when the moment arrives, there's no gap and daylight between what you said you were going to do and what you're planned to do and what the community really needs. And I'll be honest with you, in the floods of 2017, when we evaluated ourselves and brought in external folks, we said, you know what, in the response, we think we did an F. So we didn't tell people fast enough, we didn't communicate well enough, We didn't activate more quickly enough, and people didn't know what to do in the EOC in a fluid manner. So we're going to grade ourselves an F and say we're going to iterate to improve there. And the high line for us is the great earthquake. That's what we're planning for, because we know the day is just out there. And then on recovery, though, we graded ourselves an A, and the externals did too, because we have a great ability to bring in a lot of partners, both in how we handle the moment, and big hearts that contribute a lot. And in that case, we very quickly had millions of dollars and thousands of people willing to pitch in. And so we got through the recovery much better than we did the response. Correlate that now to today. So the way we run our EOC is when this became an issue, we were very closely involved in collaborating with our county, which has statutory and expertise powers over health events. So we wanted to respect their lane, but we also said we need to take care of our 1.1 million people. And as that process started, we instantly started up our virtual EOC. We had the ability to turn our organization, about 7,000 people, to a virtual one in about the space of a week. And that allowed us to do a lot of things that we had planned for longer journeys, but we actually ended up doing in days and weeks, because we wanted to be able to do things like plan review, so construction and building could still happen. We stood up the 311 center and advanced the access, so residents and businesses could say, how does this affect me? And our employees, we were able to tell them, here are the rules of the road, and we're going to keep on evolving those, but we have a flash report every day, morning and night. We here practice OKRs and sprints, so every sprint is defined by objectives, a series of key results that are as measured by. And we say in each increment of time, who's working on what and how quickly can we get those things done, with a focus on delivering that difference and change. So if you talk about where we are now, to go from the flood to today, we took on the county's feeding responsibility. So for about 1.8 million people. So we went from feeding 800 people a day to 300,000+. We said in closing city facilities, we got that done in about a week and a half. City facilities, virtual options, and even the closing of parks and public areas to make sure that people didn't commiserate in a way that the health order said not to. So that we're one of the ones where we started off as an epicenter, and now we're an afterthought for the curve, and it's going to be a process of continuing to manage that curve and the infection. We collaborated with others and have a lot of ability to do like the national testing, response, and data platform that AFI and Oracle have been a part of, as well as Splunk, Accenture, and Adobe. So we can get to testing at scale nationwide. And in terms of the city's business, we are keeping the cash flow going. So our financial operations haven't taken a hit in terms of process. They have taken a hit because of the economic impact and unemployment piece. And then we also have our roundtables with builders and with our businesses on how can we help you get through this, because we're in it together. So just to put a kind of a fine point on it, going from a flood that affected maybe about 20,000, 25,000 people, we're glad to say no one had any loss of life. It was only loss of property. And we got through that better in the recovery than response. And in this case, in the space of a month and a half, we turned pretty much all of our operations and staff into virtual employees. We absorbed feeding 300,000 people a day. And in terms of the partnerships, we have national scale readiness for testing, data, and response. We have Parks and Recs programs that are checking in on our vulnerable populations. We have necessities programs checking in on those vulnerable populations about medical supplies and those types of things. We're sheltering and have sheltering capacity for about 1,000 people a night. And we have homeless programs and partnerships taking care of those who really need it most. And the last is we also have alliances with our school districts where we've stood up Wi-Fi for those kids in digital divide areas who were falling or have potential to fall even further behind. Imagine the summer slide only all year because they couldn't get to their materials and they couldn't get to their schools and each other. So lots of partnerships, lots of readiness. And in that EOC environment, we went virtual and people knew their roles and were very practiced in it so we could immediately respond. Last thing I'll say is probably never measure yourself on just how well you went virtual. I think in the maturity scale and continuum, just saying, yeah, we virtualize our service, that's only the first order. It's kind of like saying, yeah, I got a D. Really where you want to say is, I did that. I stood up the programs that were protecting life second, or along with that, that we're collaborating and protecting livelihoods and economic health third, and then fourth, that we're actually aiming towards recovery. And that means economic, or at least equity plays, and are you addressing all of the needs of your community? It means that you're talking to the different stakeholder groups, but don't just leave it as we virtualized our city services. Really angle it towards, are we being a good community and supporting all facets of the community that need that help in the moment of crisis?
Rob, that's, it's such an impressive response. I want to unpack a little bit, because it's not just, fairy dust that got you there. The best time to plant a tree is 10 years ago, and the second best time is today. So let's talk about the tree planting, that the city as San Jose has been doing. You and I talked about, for example, let's look at collaborations. Right? There's a close collaboration with the county. That didn't just happen now because there's a crisis. Let's talk about muscle building and how you become a collaborative organization.
Sure. So I think part of that comes from two DNA aspects, and Tom has spent some time out here, so he could probably speak to this, and Peter as well. Is in government and government technology, civic tech, we like being first, but we like sharing just as much, and that's one of the great natures of us. And on your question, we know that in a crisis, if you go alone, you won't go far, and you won't go very fast. So all those partnerships with the county, with companies, with the community-based organizations, those are essential to have all the way through. And so we have, for example, when we're feeding people, 13 major CBOs that we're working with anyway. The discussion then becomes, how do you scale up? When you talk with the companies and the county, you have joint programs and joint EOC activities. How do you scale up? And so to answer your question a different way, those are part of our practice. And we also have very intense EOC maintenance in terms of the exercises we do. We do 2 major training events and practice events every year. So we have cadences of people going through that and exercising what that looks like in the moment. So it's not just academic. And then we also have, and I think this is a baseline for any innovative organization, is you have an innovation demonstration agreement and the ability to do $0 pilots. So an innovation demonstration agreement, San Jose is kind of the granddaddy of that, is 2009 that it created the first one, but saying we can at no cost work with an outside group where we're both trying to learn. And so we can spend city time, we can access city resources, but we can't give you any money. And in return, you can spend your time and resources. And what we're trying to do is build things that are going to be great lessons for us both and might turn into something great, but it's just a matter of practice that you try things out and you try to get smart. And then the $0 PO pilot programs are similarly angled. So we want to say, before we get into an RFP or before we adopt a technology or an architecture, we really should know it and experiment with it first. Let's work with the vendor community to try those things out in small. And we have a saying here, nail it, then scale it. And that's really what a lot of these programs are about. So again, organizational muscle, as you talk about, is build those structurally into your organization and support those programs because you want to try new things. And when you're the leanest big city in the country like we are, part of my IT strategic plan says we will not be the biggest because we don't have the resources for it, but we can be smartest and fastest. So that's part of what the structure you have to build supports.
You kind of read my mind to the next question. So there's this external factor of building these partnerships and having these structures in place already. Then we should come back to, you talked about condensing strategic plans from months to weeks. That's not something also you can just wave a magic wand and do. That's something that, because of your management techniques and using OKRs and using sprints, allows you to change focus quickly. Can you discuss how the OKR culture has maybe blossomed in the city of San Jose? Where did it start? How has it grown? And how did it allow you to pivot very quickly in response here?
Sure, and I'll tell you the way we did it, and I can't tell you it's the perfect way, but it did work for us, is when I first came on, and then when Kip Harkness, our Deputy City Manager for Innovation and Technology and Emergency Services, came on. We're both advocates of sprints and Scrum. So agile methods, you'll hear Kanban, you'll hear Scrum. There's other versions out there too. Even Scrumban is another term. But what it's built around is relationships and product. So old-fashioned product or project management is we talk, we get an idea of what we need, we kind of go away and do our things and occasionally touch base. And at the end, I deliver something, and gosh, I hope that's what you wanted. And that often doesn't work. And we see that throughout innovation culture is the less you talk, the less you're close, and the less you deliver for increments of time, the more risk accrues and the more likely you are to miss your target in the end. That disclarity is endemic. So for us, we implemented Scrum, and here we have 2-week Scrums in IT. They do 2-week Scrums in the city manager's office and the innovation team as well. Each one is defined by first what your strategic order is, council priorities, city managers, for us, 8 enterprise priorities. That all shapes your strategic planning. And then from there, you map out your sprints and you evolve that over time. So there's no harm and no shame in the organization's priorities changing over the course of the year. You knew what you mapped out at the beginning of the year, you know what's resourced, and you know what and why has changed, and you make those changes very fluidly. So the other aspect of that is OKRs. OKRs are objectives and key results. There's a great book by John Doerr called Measure What Matters. And this has helped a lot of the most successful startups in our culture here in Silicon Valley be what they are. So Intel, Google, so not just a new fad, but Intel started using a variant of this back in the 60s, 70s, and onward, right? But what they do is they coalesce clarity. So we're going to have a small number of objectives. They're going to be high level, and we're going to say there's going to be some key results associated with each of those that we're going to be able to say as measured by. There's no fluff, or if there's fluff, you're allowing yourself to include fluff, but really we're going to agree on what this means. And the other power of that is it coalesces things north-south as well as east-west. So if you say, here's our overall objectives, the CEO or city manager, the deputy city manager, the directors, everyone can say, all right, I see that. We show each other's OKRs and what we're doing, and people can align with each other on their own rather than being told. So if our one objective is protect for our COVID response, we have 3 major objectives. One is protect life, one is protect livelihood, and the third is protect the organization and make sure the organization's well-being is there. So those are the objectives. Key results, protecting life. We have our food program. We have our shelter program. If you go all the way to the protecting the organization, we have how we're taking care of our people. If you go through the shelter or the livelihoods, those are the economic programs, our use of aid, stimulus, the roundtable. We know what we're doing with whom and why and who's in charge. But everyone can align their own goals to those as they cascade from top to bottom, but also with each other on teams. So for us, we have about 300, almost 400 people in the EOC. Every week is defined by a sprint plan, and those objectives and key results are pervasive through multiple. And people through the sections and the units then align to that. That's our job as we write our plans. And then the organizational muscle, Joel, going back to that point, this is something we practice in our normal lives and something that goes into our emergency lives. Though instead of 2-week sprints, we do 1-week sprints. So you just change the cadence because the speed of the occasion demands it.
Is there a version of your your weekly OKRs that we can share with this group just to get a mental picture of what that looks like for your EOC?
Yeah, actually, I think I have a couple printouts I can share with you after the fact.
Perfect. Yeah, no, that's great. We'll send them. Okay, Andy, I want to come over to you for a second and look at this intersection. A couple things. Rob mentioned roundtables with businesses, and I want to talk about the intersection of business and government and how examples of where they're really playing well together. But I just want to start up at the top level right now. With the topic of the day is reopening the economy, and in Arizona, how is that conversation going? What are the factors that are at play, and what are you thinking of as far as reopening the economy?
Yeah, thanks, Joel. And Rob, super impressive. I took a number of notes there. It's great stuff. Yeah, so first to qualify, I am a 6-time founder that has just taken the leap into public service a year ago. So this has been an incredible experience and an incredible time, certainly this time, but also the previous year. Tom and I have known each other for a while. So I'm coming in from that angle. So I totally get the OKRs and the sprints and the lean process that I've been implementing throughout everything I possibly can. So it's just awesome. So I'm fully equipped to do a lot of things and fully unequipped to do many others. So it's definitely learning as we go. As I've termed it, running and chewing gum at the same time. And we're going to continue to do that. We do adopt a lot of the notions that that Rob has so eloquently put out. And there's so much going on. So I just want to make sure it's also framed that I am a part of a very, very large team. And I think that's one of the big things that has to be consistent throughout all of this. But so what we've started to look at in our positionings, and let me kind of give you a little bit of where we play. The Arizona Commerce Authority is the state economic development organization. It's kind of a unique one where we're not a department. We are a public-private. The chairman of our organization is the governor. It is functioned through a lot of those government committee activities and so forth, but it is a public-private. Sandra Watson, our CEO, has now been leading economic development now for 5 governors. So the experience level has been phenomenal, and the team is very wide. So we interface the business aspect to the government aspect and exchange all of that. And so from a COVID perspective, it's obviously an integral cog to all of the activities that have gone on from the Arizona Department of Health Services, to Rob's point, life first, health first. And then what do we do to secure that? And then moving from that process to livelihood recovery, restart, and so forth. So just to give you a framework of where we sit in. My current activities have been unbelievable. I just would have never imagined going and doing a lot of the things that I've done in the last 30 days, 45 days, I guess. I'm losing track. Whether it's 7 a.m. on Sunday morning or 7 a.m. on a Tuesday, it doesn't matter anymore, and I do have to check that. So for us, we jumped in on a number of levels in the whole environment very, very quickly. I love what Rob said about it's not just enough to virtualize, but we had to, right? We had to virtualize a ton of stuff. It's kind of like that age-old saying, it's just software, man, just do it, right? It's a little more difficult than that, and you have to be prepared to make sure that you make those moves really aggressively. So we virtualized countless programs within the state. We've utilized the virtualization of those to start to measure what success rates we're having. So we could talk a little bit about that. But what we had to do also in that environment was jump in to assist life. As many of you have been aware of many of the significant issues. So when you look at the curve of what occurred, it was very much interfacing to assist Arizona's Department of Health Services on PPE, basic elements. Really looking at the supply chain and trying to help out on that regard. So a lot of our focus went from PPE to ventilators to testing to contact tracing and technology initial assessments that we become very good at. So we used the developed muscles that we had captured along the way as being founders and investors and venture capitalists, and evaluating those and doing an initial dive so that we can sequence and be a funnel to the decision makers at the health side, so that they had some process, because our health community has great handle on the health side, but then they got inundated with just wonderful wishes of great service to help on PPE, but if you don't have a system to handle that. So one of the things we did very, very quickly was digitize that input and, of course, compartmentalize it, break it down, help to do some quick initial vetting, and then assist along the lines of procurement, supply chain, everything across the board. So we had many manufacturers that needed or wanted to help and thought they could. So we have a manufacturing team as part of the Arizona Commerce Authority that jumped in very quickly to help large and small manufacturers affect very, very positively our response and activities in terms of mitigation. So it kind of phased in that portion. Again, life, I love the concept. So, first the life side, and then from the current side, it shifted very, very quickly now to obviously maintaining the guidelines on the health side, but then looking with that overlaid as the primary factor, what sequencing rollout, how do we apply the federal top level, and how do we apply that to statewide, countywide, citywide, and start that rollout both in terms of industry segment, verticals, and so forth. Again, we play a role in that in terms of bridging the business community to those responses, and we've been very fortunate in the structure that we've had. Because it's a public-private organization, our board of directors is very, very unique. It's chaired by the governor, led by Sandra Watson, and then we have a combination of local legislation leaders that are on the board, as well as our local business leaders on the board. And that combination is awfully powerful when you start to have to deal with inputs and feedback and responses like this. So one way we did that was reach out to literally hundreds, if not thousands of individuals, created town halls, requests for information, and really started the process of receiving incredible feedback from Fortune 500 companies all the way down to companies that have 3-4 employees. And we've codified that into various action plans and approaches, which is being solidified as we speak. And in the meantime, then, while we're doing that level of planning work, really executing on a number of really important areas. First, if we look at the segmentation, we have large businesses, and then, the small and medium size, and then the, micros, which are, we think, incredibly impacted right now, whether it's below 20 employees or, make the cut. So first, we shored up our tech community, which was easier than, probably most, because we had such good access to it. We run a decade-old accelerator and have just such a vibrant community. We moved all of that to virtual very, very quickly, and they've responded beautifully. But then we've tapped into that tech community to make sure that we're able to utilize their resources, much like taking the OKR and Sprint concept, but other aspects in terms of digitizing small businesses and helping them. And then, crazy enough, idea gets formulated from a quasi-government public-private entity on a Sunday morning. In fact, this last Sunday morning. And we're now executing on a statewide initiative to create a small business boot camp that I'm launching on Monday with the support of the state and so many wonderful individuals. And we're doing a daily boot camp with a regiment that takes the first, elements of business survival and then moves it into the really critical aspect of planning for a restart and then the actual execution of the restart and recovery. That daily boot camp has been incredible. We put a call to action out to the state business leaders and community leaders, underserved areas, rural areas, as well as our main business areas, and have been able to, it creates such an incredible swell of capabilities where we're not here charged to make sure that we deliver all of this content and abilities for these small businesses, but we bring the state expertise to bear on it and individuals and organizations that already are doing a lot of this. So we'll kick that off on Monday. We're calling it loosely right now. It's being marketed, but done is better than perfect. So we're going forward on so much of this. We're launching it on Monday to focus on micro PPP, the $60 billion that has been released. We feel the $250 billion for companies is applied for and might go out in hours. But the new $60 billion divided in 30 and $30 billion for sizing of community banks and credit unions, we feel we have an opportunity to make an impact. So we're going to do that maybe for a day, maybe for a day and a half. And then we move really quickly into alternative business and lending options, and then move them through a cycle that can help them and support them through expertise throughout the community. This is just one example that we've done. We've also, just really quick, been able to pivot a very large venture capital conference, for example, for our startups to fully virtual, called the Unmet Conference. And we're really proud to say we have 200 venture capital companies participating and working with seed and Series A, B companies for funding in a really tough time over a virtual environment starting on Monday as well. And it's 150 companies and 200 venture capital firms. And, it's that time of need, right? Where it's very, very difficult to get the attention of VCs for the new deals. And these are all new deals to these VCs. So we're pretty pleased that they're showing up to the party on that. So a lot of great activity going on.
I mean, tremendous activity. When you talk about outreach from Fortune 500 companies down to mom and pops, what is the how of that? How are you doing that?
Well, we've got, the Arizona Commerce Authority has got a really outstanding marketing engine. We've perfected that engine over a very long period of time. So we're plugged into all that community. We have 106,000 small businesses in the state of Arizona. So we've been able to access them. We're going to continue to do that. If you'll look at the breakouts, it's incredibly diverse in terms of how to reach everybody. And our goal is really to reach everybody. And it's just not done by us. It has to be through our partners and our community partners. The concept is that we've created a framework that we're trying to have community partners plug into and make sure that they can, number one, utilize the incredible content and the capabilities that they've already created so that we can execute on that and have them personally execute it. And then the second is to have them reach out to their constituents and others that we have missed. So it's a rippling effect. It's a viral effect.
Fantastic. Thank you. Peter, I want to ask you a question, but first, Rob, there was something that came in. I wanted to highlight it. When you were talking about your response and measuring what matters and moving beyond just like, are we up and running? You mentioned kind of 4 metrics that you're following. If you could put those into the chat for everyone, there was a really nice point and someone wanted to hear that.
Okay.
All right, thank you. And Peter, from the Oracle's perspective, you're seeing from big cities to small organizations. What's your reaction to Rob's what we've been talking about here this morning?
Yeah, well, when we designed this series, we wanted to make it applicable to the entire spectrum of cities, from small to large, simple to complex, contract to full service. There's not one size fits all. The interesting perspective that Rob and Andy bring to the conversation is that how do you respond to a situation like this where you're having major disruption to local government in more than just let's keep the doors open? Because what we're seeing in a lot of cities is that they're doing their level best. And then in a lot of cities, they're doing a tremendous job to keep those core services up and running. And that could be all that they're able to do given their capacity and their size. But what Rob is pointing to is, that's good for now. But we really need to use every opportunity, every crisis as an opportunity to use that as a new watermark and to improve from there. So we've heard from Jacksonville where they said, okay, we had Hurricane Dorian, and we used that as a watermark to say, okay, we're going to improve going forward. We're not going to let another crisis set us back. You have the flood in 2017 in San Jose, same kind of thing. We're not going to make those mistakes over again. In Malibu, you had the Woolsey fires and the ensuing floods afterwards to say, okay, that's our watermark. We've learned lessons. We're not going to let that happen again. What we have here, and what I'm hearing from other cities, is that there is an opportunity to kind of do some intervals, do some conditioning, some local government calisthenics, if you will, to use this opportunity to try to implement new innovation and new technology and new solutions that otherwise you wouldn't have the ability to try because, there isn't a crisis to respond to. Now you can use this crisis in one of two ways. You could try to just hold up the business as it is, or you could try to use it as an opportunity to improve. And I feel like there is an opportunity here to do that, and to really try to look at this as almost like an opportunity to that you've given a chance to experiment and try to move from saving lives to helping communities thrive. And as we're now into the 39th and 40th day of the shelter in place for many states, we're seeing that cities are starting to think about how to reopen, and that dialogue is starting to come out. But science is telling us that once we open up the economy again and things start to flow, we're going to see a resurgence of this coronavirus. We're going to see a resurgence, and therefore we need to be prepared to respond to a potential second shelter in place. And so my question back to the listeners here is what are you doing to kind of help prepare for that? Because if the reality is that this is not going to stop in May, we're not going to just go back to business as normal, but this is going to be an ongoing series of shelter-in-place ordinances made at the local level to kind of control the spread of the virus. What are you doing to maintain that continuity of service? And I had a conversation with another good friend of mine, Jonathan Reichenthal, who's just published a book called Smart Cities for Dummies. If you haven't heard of it, it just came out. You can pre-order your copy today. But in that book and in conversations with him, we talked about, don't just take this opportunity to go back to normal. We should take this opportunity to accelerate to what we want our local governments to look like. Let's not make that normal the go-to. We should be looking for what is the evolution of where we are to where we want to be in terms of service provision. So with that, I would just encourage everybody to use this opportunity. I've mentioned this before in the last calls, to use this opportunity to really try to challenge yourself and engage with the other sectors, public, private, nonprofit, to start the dialogue about how can we improve operations. And we've had this conversation now with Malibu. Next week, we'll bring Reva Feldman back onto this webinar to talk about, well, what's happened? It's been a month. What have you learned in that time as a small local government agency? And that's going to be another interesting conversation. But for this, what I thought was interesting in talking to Rob just a couple of days ago was it's an opportunity to flex, and it's an opportunity to learn and grow. And I feel like San Jose is on that continuum further along, and is really able to set the bar about what is it like to thrive during a crisis, not to just fall back and play defense. Send it back to you, Joel.
Yeah, Joel, if I could just really quick, I love that, Peter. In fact, my experience has been that, looking back at the last 30 to 45 days, it's like you scratch your head. Why didn't we do some of this, quicker and faster before? So there's lessons learned there. But the elements of what we've created now, for example, this small business boot camp is an incredibly large initiative for us. That is not just going to be a 4-week, 6-week deal. We already know that this is going to end up being a sustained, institutionalized process that we actually go forward long-term. And I think matching up these short-term, low-hanging fruit executions and trying to angle those towards a longevity is one of the real cool things that's going on right now that I love exploring.
Tom, you and I have had a bunch of conversations around this in the last few weeks. What is the role of innovation for local governments here? At some point you want to just kind of focus on what you're good at, and yet you also want to use this as an opportunity to grow. Where does innovation fit in?
Yeah, well, it's just so impressive, both Rob and Andy's ability to pivot in these large organizations. And government, that's not normally what you're known for, right? And it is. So I've spent 20 years in startups in GovTech, pretty much my whole career. A little bit of work here in Arizona with the Startup Accelerator as well. But and so Prime Gov, my current company, we're still 20 people. We're a small but growing business. And I always talk to these. I'm probably involved in maybe 10 GovTech startups, and that early grind of getting from kind of idea to enough traction that you can raise money and that you can kind of start really growing and reinvesting in the business is so hard. So I loved hearing what Rob had to say about kind of the $0 purchasing contracts and the ability to like innovate with these startups, because I think government, it's just the hardest place in my mind, or it's the longest start time to get started. But it's really impressive when we all come together in a time of need like this to drive this innovation. And when I was talking to Andy yesterday about just restarting the businesses, I've probably spent 20 hours this week just interviewing colleagues and friends of mine about, how do we restart the economy? What are the trade-offs? When's too soon? And empathizing with everybody's perspective, because I think it's really hard. If your business is doing fine, your economics are fine, then of course you're really leaning in on the health side. But if you're about to lose your house and your business, then you're probably leaning more on the economic side. And government leaders trying to balance all that is just incredible. And one of the thoughts that I had, and I'd love to hear Andy talk more about this, was, how nuanced does this have to get, right? Down to specific communities and counties and cities. They don't all need the same prescription necessarily, certainly not on the economic side, but maybe on the health side, it's causes some problems. And then, how do you think about each individual business and reopening? And I talked to a friend of mine who's in retail, and he actually said, hey, I'm better off staying closed until I know the customers are going to come back. If I reopen and no customers come in, that becomes a big challenge to me. So maybe Andy, you could talk a little bit more about how you guys are kind of looking at all the nuances in this and trying to take this really large growing economy in Arizona and figure out how to balance the two. And as you mentioned, I know you guys health is still first, right? That's the primary view, but how are you guys thinking about that economic side in a little more detail with these businesses?
Yeah, I'm assuming we can answer that one, Tom, a little bit. So, as you start to look at it, for Arizona's perspective, obviously we're trying to solicit incredible feedback from the business community, and then weave that in at a top level to the health side, and making sure that health is obviously the number one item that gets created. So we also have a vantage point of now starting to look at how other rollouts are going, as you start to see some of the soft rollouts in some states, and looking at, what the interpretations and also the experiences are. So that's helpful from our perspective as well. But it's going to be a variation across the board. You guys might have read, the Navajo Nation, which is part of Arizona, has been impacted tremendously on this, way over impacted as a percentage. So that's a rural environment, but still very impacted. So not just when you're rural, is it going to be okay? But some of the areas that are impacted will be geographic considerations. And then of course, some of the industry segments will be looked at as well. For example, rolling out elective surgeries. Again, looking at the notion of impact to PPE versus opening something like that. Then would you want to go to dentists as well? They have experience with PPE, okay, they can do it. Is there enough? So these are the types of micro decisions and micro needs that need to be put in place. And the notion we have is, as we start to roll out this concept of a daily cadence to build muscle on this with small businesses, it starts to permeate with the larger businesses, and looking at some of the learnings that we can do from them as well. but then also looking at the segmentation. So for example, as you mentioned, retail. I'm interested to see how it goes in Dallas in the next couple of days with the drive-up retail concept, where they're taking orders and delivering, getting some contact. But that's going to be a very different premise to the restaurant community and how they start to launch. You know, one of the real true facts of the matter is you start to reduce 20-30% of restaurant capacity as a norm, that business model is challenged tremendously. So how do we deal with that, and how do we, you know, think about those things? So for us, it's interaction with the experts and the community members and making sure that we are listening. One of the things that we did right up front with this boot camp and this concept was we planned 3 full days up front, and that's it. We want to know what the feedback is and what the current issue is going to be as that fluid nature starts to move, so we can become incredibly lean and nimble as we move along. But it's going to be a challenge, and it's not going to be one switch. It's going to be multiple cadences as we start to move those across geographies as well as industry segments.
Thanks, Andy. Rob, I wanted to come back to you. You put a nice post into the chat around the continuum of where we're trying to get to. You and I were talking about virtualization is just a tool, right? It's not a destination. This is the destination, the levels of maturity here to get to a resilient and secure city, as you said, for San Jose. But I wanted to just get into some specifics, like, you know, can you look at a particular program or a particular activity that has resulted in a level 4 maturity, or that you're like, oh, this is an opportunity for us to demonstrate that we're at level 3 or level 4, and how are you kind of identifying those opportunities and then tracking whether you're successful in actually capitalizing on them?
Yeah, absolutely. And some of those are, I'm just going to refer back to a couple of those items that I mentioned earlier. And one was food. So when we had food and necessities and our residents were telling us, hey, we're struggling. Some have lost jobs. We've got about a 12-13% jump up from 2% unemployment to 12-13% unemployment. Kids were out of school. So that's where some of them were getting their nutrition. How do we, instead of giving them 1 meal a day or 2, give them 3 and 7 days a week? So we worked with the county on that one, and the county said, we're so overwhelmed with the health response. Hey, City of San Jose, can you take care of the entire county on food response, food and nutrition and necessities? So that's one where we could perceive the need from our CBOs, from our own programs, and from the county, and we could work out how we're going to confront that. Another one was testing data and responses. We know that to reopen we had a nice meeting with the mayor of Seoul, Korea, had some notes with our friends from Taiwan in our sister city program. And they said, you know, the ones that actually seems to have mastered this as well as it can be mastered are those 2. And they said there are 4 lessons really around these pandemics. One is you have to be able and willing to close things down and act decisively. Another one is it's data oriented, and you need to be transparent, warts and all, number 3, about what the data is telling you and what you need to do in the community to respond. And there's no politics, and lessons of past pandemics and leadership or lack of leadership have shown you one thing above all, is when you assure people to their detriment health-wise, it gets worse and much more so. So those are the biggest pandemic death events in history, is where people assured folks rather than took care of them. And then the 4th thing is that you keep on conversing, partnering, and addressing that data line to decision line. And I'll tell you, our maturity model here for decision making is you get information and you can do analysis, then you get patterns and insights. Only when you cross the line there as the fulcrum do you get better decisions and actions, do you get better prediction and programmatic response. But you have to be strong in being able to get at that information, conveying that information, relating that information, so that you can make that better decision and response, and that helps the community. And then kind of circling back to your question, Joel, a couple others that we have is the sheltering piece, is where those are needed, the overnight warming locations as opposed to the full shelters, us actually creating for one of our locations we turned into a family location because we were hearing some good feedback around, hey, it's not the same thing. Families have different needs, so we're going to orient around that. Working with FEMA and the county on Kelly Park, which is about 100 trailers for homeless people and people with special needs, even on top of food, nutrition, and finances and those types of things. And so I would tell you that that higher level response where you're being strategic and where you're meeting needs, not only now, but in next pandemics and emergencies, those are where we've had some successes, along with the Wi-Fi initiative, where we have one of the largest public Wi-Fi networks really aimed at organizational ability, economic activity, and digital inclusion. And that's the 3 cluster piece of our digital inclusion and broadband strategy. Hope that answers the question okay.
It definitely does, and it allows for those who would like to drill into some specifics. It gives them some places to do some research or outreach through us, and I'll coordinate that. Back to you, Rob.
Actually, Joel, if I can say one more thing.
Please do.
I know just because we're the 10th largest city in the country, some people, and I remember in my time in Arizona, you often heard from the smaller cities, 23,000 cities and counties in the country. 80% are communities less than 75,000 in population, staffs of less than 250. And you heard from others, oh, that we're just too small. And the answer is that's not true. So San Jose might be the 10th largest city in the country, but we have the budget of the 50th. So our budget for IT and for operations roughly matches Albuquerque, New Mexico. And so we do all these things based on not a lot of money, but a lot of partnership and a lot of structure and practice. So if I can just add that as one more comment, don't hold yourself back thinking money is the key to being able to do anything, or letting yourself fall into the trap of we need more resources.
Thank you. That actually hits to a theme that I also heard when you mentioned you're engaging your sister cities, which after talking about this for a month is the first time that this has come up. And actually I wanted to take this to you, Peter. Is there something that we can do leveraging Oracle's global footprint to expand this conversation and maybe bring in some more international perspectives and maybe kind of shake things up a little bit as far as the input that we're getting? I'd love to expand this conversation.
Yeah, so we've had conversations with our partners in EMEA and JPAC, Latin America. Don't think that the US is the only one going through this. Just recently, I heard from colleagues down in Brazil that they're really curious about, what the US is doing about this virtual local government. And they started hearing about this webinar and were interested to learn more about it. So this isn't unique to the US, and it's not unique to the cities that we've had on this webinar series. This is something that other cities throughout the globe are dealing with, but more importantly, they're realizing that this is something that they're going to have to become comfortable with. And what we're seeing is that there's an opportunity for people on this call to be beacons to cities in other regions. So if you have sister cities, if you have relationships with other cities neighboring you or in other countries, definitely reach out to them and share what you've learned to help explain, what the options are, and that, being small is a challenge, but it's not an excuse, right? I mean, we still have to provide services. The vast majority, to Rob's point, the vast majority of cities are not only under 75,000, they're under 5,000. So very small communities still need to respond. And depending on where you are and what kind of city you are, you could have majority of your services contracted. But still, the residents don't know that or may not care. They still look to the government as an entity to solve some of these immediate needs that Rob mentioned around homelessness or economic prosperity or just basic services. And so what we're hearing and what we can do at Oracle is to give this legs and give this an amplified voice and really put this on a stage. A lot of the people on this call were invited from international regions because they do want to hear about what we're doing and what we're thinking about. We have relationships in Australia, in the UK, where we've mobilized cities and regional governments to work remotely. 311 is a simple example of that. We're seeing that used really well. In Rob's example, they used their 311 implementation from Oracle to immediately virtualize their 311 system. So literally within a few days of going online, one day,
Yeah.
they were able to push all of those employees virtual, which really frees up a tremendous amount of space and capacity and something that we need to be thinking about. Looking at the studies from Gartner and IDC and other analysts, we're seeing that, like a lot of crises that hit local government, there's a loss of huge revenue, sales tax revenue, hospitality revenue, hotel revenue. More than 50% of cities are being hurt financially, tremendously hurt financially. Cities that depend on, say, a property tax like San Jose don't feel the hit as much, but they're still going to feel a hit. But cities that are completely dependent on sales tax are looking at, dire straits. And so coming out of this, we really need to figure on how to, again, go back to the adage of doing more with less and automating services to be able to continue to provide those services to your constituents without throwing your hands up and saying, well, because of the economy, we're not able to provide the services we did before.
Hey, Joe, can I add one comment? Is one of the interesting things that had popped up in this is since we moved our council sessions to online, we have more participation than ever. So we've got 300 to 400 people, 1,600 comments, a couple hundred wants to speak or notations. That's been one of the surprising things is how much involvement it actually has increased.
That's fantastic. Brings a smile to my face. Actually, that's a great segue. Tom, I wanted to give you the last comment here. Where are the opportunities? Like Rob just said, where are we seeing rays of sunshine here as people make switches?
Yeah, it's interesting because the concept of virtual government is fantastic for those people who don't have time to come in person. And I've been talking about this free time divide in the United States for a decade now in terms of public participation. And so now I can attend my council meetings from home. And like Rob said, we've been offering a tool for digital comments so that I can do a text-based comment. As soon as an agenda is posted, that gets routed into a report. It gets distributed to elected officials. Some people are reading comments during the meeting, but I think as we stop replicating old processes through technology and start thinking about new processes and think about the outcomes that could be done. So the public meeting process, I've probably talked to 1,000 cities now about their virtual meetings. I'll be presenting a report on kind of all the technology chosen, the interactions, how many people are taking digital comments and how many people are kind of calling in. I launched a survey yesterday to those communities just to see. Rob, I'll have to get that over to you so you guys can put your input in as well. But the transformation to virtual in the public meeting space has been incredible. And largely, I'm hearing that people are enjoying it on the staff and elected official side. And certainly the public, I think, has better access. And so hopefully a lot of these tools that we're putting in place now will be considered as we are able to come back and see each other in person and shake hands. Some of that convenience for our communities will be left over and will help us take a step forward out of all of this.
Tom, Andy, Peter, and Rob, thank you very much for participating this week. Everyone here from the audience, we look forward to talking next week. We'll come back we'll go from one of the biggest cities to one of the small ones, Malibu and 17,000 people, and discuss virtualization practices there. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.